Hello, and welcome to my YouTube channel, Reading Little Blue Books out loud, while stoned. In this video, we're going to do part 4 of Little Blue Book number 1087, and it's titled The Facts About Fascism, written by Miriam Allen DeFord, copyright May of 1926. And it's unusual to have not only the year, but the month. So this was written right during the height of fascism when it was in power, and Benito Mussolini was in charge in Italy. So part 4 means chapter 4, and chapter 4 is titled The Matteotti Case. So let's get started. On June 10th, 1924, Giacomo Matteotti, a socialist deputy, was kidnapped by 5 persons in an automobile. By the 15th, it was acknowledged by the fascists that he was dead. On August 16th, his body was found near Crofano, a few miles from Rome. It was buried under 14 inches of soil and was naked with a long steel file plunged into its breast. Why should this murder, only one among so many, have caused so profound a commotion in Italy that it endangered the entire fascist regime? Matteotti was a mild, right-wing socialist, a follower of Filippo Turati. He was a declared enemy of communism, a scholarly jurist, a courteous intellectual without any personal contentions on his hands. Why was he selected for assassination? And how far were the leaders of fascism implicated in his death? To begin with, the pacific nature of the man, his abhorrence of counter-violence against the violence of the fascisti, his winning personality had made him a popular figure. On June 27th, all the workers of Italy, even fascists, stopped work from 10 to 10:20 in the morning as a tribute to Matteotti and a protest against his murder. For 6 weeks after his death, the sidewalk in front of his house was kept heaped with flowers, and crowds of men and women knelt there praying for the repose of his soul. In August, a tremendous scene took place in the Chamber of Deputies. It is described by the London Daily Herald. The president read out, according to custom, the list of members' names. When he came to the letter M, he hesitated a moment, and then in muffled tones uttered the name Matteotti. In the profound stillness that reigned even in the galleries, one could literally hear almost the heartbeats of members. Then a ringing voice called out, "Here!" Everyone turned in the direction from which the cry came in consternation and alarm. Mussolini was white as a sheet. The president, in his embarrassment, rang his bell, and the socialist, as well as all the other members of the opposition, now shouted with one voice, "Here! Here!" The fascisti were silent, for Matteotti was indeed there, in spirit. At this very time, fascist soldiers were marching through Rome, brazenly acknowledging their responsibility for Matteotti's death by a ribald song that ran, "Out of Matteotti's body we make sausages now." Fascists. Why did the fascists commit this crime? And just who was responsible for it? In a masterly article, "Why Matteotti Had to Die," in The Nation for July 30th, 1924, James Fuchs summed up the situation by saying, "He was slain for 3 reasons. Because he countered the move of Mussolini, who wanted 320 mandates declared valid en bloc by revealing the true story of the elections. Because he was about to incriminate the chief participants in the after-election acts of terrorism, and because, if suffered to live, he would have forced judicial action against the main corruptionists about the dictator. To mention only a few of the events in connection with the elections, 2 days beforehand, a circular letter of the administration enjoined all employees of the post, telegraph, and telephone systems to vote the national list on pain of dismissal. In Girardenti, the Catholic populi, municipal authorities, were suspended and reinstated only upon a pledge that they would advise the population to vote the fascist ticket. In Alexandria, Della Rocco, a police commissioner, appeared before the municipal authorities, threatening to return on election day with 50 fascist militiamen to crush the skull of anyone not voting the fascist ticket. Whereupon the entire magistracy resigned. The fascio of Shaka, yeah, that's how it's a pronunciation, on April 2nd openly declared that it would throw out all anti-fascist ballots and, to make assurance doubly sure, that it would cast fascist votes for those former inhabitants that had emigrated to foreign parts. In Campobello Delicata, the fascist militia doused the chief of Popolari with castor oil, gave him a severe beating, and threatened to do the like to everyone staying away from the polls on election day or voting a ticket other than the national list. In Chieti, the socialist candidate, Caliano Magno, was first kept under restraint in his house, then beaten by an officer of the fascist militia and forced to leave town. 4 dailies of the fascist dissidents were suspended by administrative decree. The entire electorate of Apulan and other towns were driven out of town on election day by fascist militia, the local fascists stuffing the ballot boxes. All rural clergymen of certain Tuscan districts were forced by fascists looking them up in their homes to do fascist electioneering among their flocks. On May 30th, the Verification Committee on mandates proposed to the Chamber the validation en bloc of 320 mandates. Matteotti fired his opening round, giving a first installment of his revelations on the elections. The young stalwarts of the right insulted him and the opposition in general, and the session closed with a free fight. 2 days later, on June 1st, Mussolini's personal organ, the Popolo d'Italiana, incited to physical violence against Matteotti. His speech in the chamber, it said, was provocative and deserving of a more tangible acknowledgement than the vituperative epithet leveled at him by a fascist deputy. The premier's vindication of the election before the Chamber of Deputies a few days later was unique in its Latin artliness. Oh no, artlessness. My brain couldn't pick that up. Latin artistness. Not to say effrontery. Should 1.5 million of the votes cast for the national list be found fraudulent or cast under fiscal coercion, even then the fascist party would still be the rightful representative of the nation. He had the assurance to continue. You of the opposition complained that you were restrained from holding free election meetings. What of it? Such meetings are of no avail anyway. A second broadside of Matteotti, dealing with the election doings of the premier's personal cronies and with their transactions in the realm of high finance, would probably have shaken even the extreme of government brass. It was not to be. No chance was given him for further and weightier discourse. A letter by Matteotti, published in the London Statist on June 7th, gives some of his conclusions based on investigation of financial fraud and corruption by the fascists, and gives the lie to the previous estimate of Italian government finances furnished to the status by the fascists. That also assisted in making Matteotti's removal desirable. Now, how far were the actual leaders of the fascist regime, which in the end means Mussolini himself, responsible for the deputy's abduction and murder? Secret documents published by The Nation in New York in April of 1925 and by the New York World in October answer this question only too clearly. These were in the form of a memorial set down by Filippo Filippelli, owner of the automobile in which Matteotti was abducted, who, by way of clearing himself, directly implicated the leaders of fascism, including Mussolini himself. They were circulated secretly as a bulletin headed Non Mollare, Don't Weaken. Bulletin of information during the fascist regime. He who receives this bulletin is morally bound to circulate it. The charges made have never been denied. Mussolini laughed them off in September by saying, airily, the feeling which was aroused throughout Italy was directed against the form of the crime and those who had supported it. If the latter had not belonged to the fascist party, the impression created would have been less painful. At the end of 1924, Deputy Cesare Forni, most powerful of the fascist dissidents, had endeavored to exculpate Mussolini personally, and at the same time attack the others connected with the crime by saying that the premier had fallen among evil companions. Among these, he named Cesare Rossi, Aldo Finza. The press added the names of General Debano and Giovanni Marinelli. All of these, as well as Forni himself, are named in the Filippelli memorandum. The actual agent was supposed to be Amerigo Domini, assisted by Hutato. But the memorandum plainly shows that Mussolini himself was the activator of the crime. To anticipate chronologically, the trial of 5 fascists for the murder of Matteotti was held in January of 1926. Rossi, Marinelli, and Filippelli were dismissed. Only tools and cat paws were left to bear the brunt of the prosecution. The attitude of the judge, presaged by the remarkable findings of the Court of Public Prosecutions, was that the intention was merely to kidnap the deputy, and that he was accidentally killed because he had the bad taste to struggle against his abductors. Silly Matteotti. Presumably, he died of a hemorrhage caused by a steel file. Turning of the page. All through the trial, the judge and the defense attorneys complimented each other and were obviously on the most friendly terms. The accused held a sort of daily reception to their friends in the courtroom. The Secchio, one of the defense counsel, made a most peculiar speech to the jury. He said, "You must consider Dumini and his companions as personifying one crowd, and Matteotti as personifying another. This explains the moral and judicial provocation. The two factions were fighting. One conquered, and the other should have resigned itself. Instead, the conquered continued to torment the victors. One day, the blow of a fanatic killed. Whose fault was it? Matteotti's death, coming after that of so many fascist martyrs, should have brought about peace and love between fascism and its opponents. But instead, it kindled new hatreds and rancors. After this amazing piece of special pleading, it is not surprising to learn that the 2 of the defendants were released, and that the other 3, though sentenced to 12 years each, had their sentences reduced by special amnesties to, counting in the time already served while waiting for trial, exactly 3 months apiece. Thus ended the Matteotti affair, which threatened for a while to crush the entire fascist regime. It will now be our duty to chronicle the further history of fascism in Italy up to the time of present writing, May of 1926. We're going to go on and do chapter 5. Fascism up to date, and this is the final chapter of this book. The comment aroused by the murder of Matteotti caused a still further restriction of the anti-fascist press. Even Avanti fell before the new regulations governing the promulgation of the Edict of 1848 dealing with the press, leaving the working class with no organ. The publication of news, which might have injurious effect on national credit at home or abroad, or cause alarm among the population, or give rise to disturbance of the public peace or prejudice the diplomatic activities of the government and its relations abroad, was forbidden under severe penalties. 44 papers were affected within 5 days. A committee also was employed to determine the acceptance or rejection of articles over the editor's head. A measure was likewise introduced in the chamber calling for the placing of foreign newspaper correspondents on the same basis as diplomats. That is, they must be acceptable to the fascist government before being allowed to function. This would effectively gag any freedom of news to foreign countries. What happens to distinguished foreigners who dare to commit on conditions of Italy? Who dare to comment on conditions of Italy may be seen from its visit of Rabindranath to Gore in February of 1925. He stayed only a few days, visiting none of the great cities outside of Rome and Milan. The papers were forbidden to publish his one speech, and the fascist organs openly insulted him. The worst thing he was alleged to have said was, "The sky of Italy is full of fog. Her gardens are despoiled of flowers." Even this poetic rebuke was too much for the sensitive fascist. Sounds familiar. I know personally an American citizen who attempted to visit Italy during this period, who was arrested because a search of his baggage at the customs disclosed a copy of The Liberator and a few other radical American publications. He was held in jail incommunicado and finally ordered to leave Italy at once. In September 1925, occurred a serious incident in Milan. A young fascist deputy, Alejandro, I don't know, the print is smudged. Alejandro Casalini. Yep, Casalini. Was killed by one Giovanni Cervi, one of the unauthorized and unbalanced terrorists whom such tyranny as that of fascism always calls forth. In retaliation, the fascists wrecked the Milan office of the socialist paper Gustasia, though Cervi was not a socialist. But worse was to come in Florence, where the Freemasons are very strong, and the fascists had from the beginning waged open warfare against them. No member of the fascist party may be a Mason. The European Masons are less conservative, both religiously and economically, than those in America. They are commonly supposed to be Republicans and freethinkers. On September 28th, a poster was displayed in Florence, reading in part as follows. The Executive Committee of the Fascio of Florence, which represents to the city and all of Italy a youthful company, dynamic, industrious, heroic, and above all, operating in the light of day, and assuming all the responsibility for the holy yet mild acts of reprisal committed by honest and valorous fascisti from the beginning to the present hour, against the disgusting baculus of the moral pestilence called the Italian Freemasonry, commands all fascisti to refrain from acts of violence and instead try to identify those affiliated with the Masonic order in order to better realize the useful objectives of a radical, decisive, and necessary punitive action. The reason for this very temporary refrain from violence became clear on October 3rd. A 60-year-old bookkeeper named Bandinelli had addressed to him a Masonic circular which was intercepted by the fascists. Luperini, the vice president of the Fascismo, went to Bandinelli's home and ordered him to give up a list of Florentine Freemasons. During the argument, a young railway employee named Becciolini, who lived in the flat above, came to Bandinelli's defense. In the fracas, Luperini was shot. Becciolini was lynched by a mob on his way to the police station, and the reprisals began. Audiences were driven out from every theater in the city at the point of fascist guns. Houses and stores of known Freemasons were burned to the ground, and armed fascisti kept the firemen from extinguishing these fires. At midnight, the fascists went to the home of Gaetano Palato, a socialist ex-deputy, and wounded him fatally. An hour later, they entered the home of Gustavo Consolo, attorney and formerly local correspondent of the Avanti, and murdered him in the presence of his wife and children. The police were given orders not to interfere, and they obeyed. The looting, burning, and shooting continued for another day. Thorsten Sellen, in an article in The Nation for November 4th, 1925, says, "This afternoon, October 5th, at sunset, Luperini's funeral was held with a pomp that is rarely equaled. About 6,000 or 7,000 marched in the solemn procession, and many times that number lined the streets and the bridges. But I could not drive from my mind the thought of old Bandinelli, whose life may be in danger so long as he stays on Italian soil, though he has committed no crime. Nor could I help wondering how many dared march behind the coffin of Consolo. This evening I heard someone say, well, tomorrow the Fascisti will have 1,000 more members too scared to stay away." James Murphy, in a series of articles in The Nation, states that Luperini's punitive expeditions have been going on for 10 years previously and had resulted in the wounding of several anti-fascists. He quotes non-Molaire, referring to as having shown the direct connection of Mussolini with the Matteotti case. The Freemasons of Florence were suspected of being back of non-Molaire. The rest followed. In all, 18 persons were killed during the riots, all murdered by the Fascisti, except Luperini, and the property of foreign subjects was among that destroyed. But no foreign powers have protested. Mussolini and his then Secretary General Roberto Farinacci are not journalists for nothing. As Murphy says, they provide the news and see that no other leaves Italy. Shortly before this, in August, occurred an attack on Deputy Amendola at Montecatini. Amendola has since died as a result of his wounds. The direct connection of Mussolini with this affair is not proved. His open participation in the hounding and consequent death of Pietro Gobetti was proved amply, as I show in my little blue book, The Truth About Mussolini, number 1088. That'll be the next book coming up. In December of 1924, a letter from Italo Balbo, one of the founders of fascism, was published, which urged the use of violence against the opposition in Bologna. Balbo immediately resigned his office as commander of the fascist militia, only to have another letter published, this time by Farinacci, as at Mussolini's direct order, stating that Sala and Forni, the fascist dissidents, should not be allowed to hold meetings. Wherever they are seen, they must be violently attacked by all fascisti. But still, fascism stood, and Mussolini with it. Even the subsequent affairs at Milan and Florence could not yet shake the stranglehold of terrorism from Italy. In October 1925, an agreement was made between the Organization of Fascist Employers and the General Federation of Labor, which finally destroyed the trade unions and eliminated the socialists from politics. Following this agreement, employers will deal only with members of the fascist unions. Disputes will be settled by a fascist board, from which appeal is forbidden. The fascist government fixes profits, wages, working conditions, and hours. On October 31st, Mussolini, as James Murphy phrased it, deposited the ultimate straw on the back of the Roman camel by appointing Filippo Cremonesi governor of Rome. Under the fascist rule, small towns have governors instead of mayors. Rome is the only large city included in this system. Cremonesi is the man responsible for the most of the graft, corruption, and financial malfeasance of fascism. He it is who, as governor or podesta, has been empowered to carry out Mussolini's grandiose scheme for restoring Rome to its ancient glory. The Forum is to be restored. The Olitatorium, and the Circus Maximus are to be excavated, and the Appian Way is to be rebuilt, the longest and widest highway in the world. Mussolini has dominated the new road from Rome to Ostia. As the distance is less than 15 miles, it may be the widest, but can scarcely be the longest. The scheme was initiated with a great feat on April 21st, 1926, the anniversary of the founding of Rome. Meanwhile, this country has now undertaken by the Italian debt settlement to help finance Italy's madness. This country meaning the United States. Riots and the beating up of American sailors in the harbor of Venice marked the insistence on America's settlement. Our government was denounced as a Shylock nation by the fascist mobs, and imprecations were yelled against the name of Senator Borah. Nevertheless, over his opposition and that of Senator Reed of Missouri, who openly called Mussolini a wild beast, the settlement was passed, and we are now implicated in the very shady finances of the fascist government. In February of 1926, Mussolini electrified the world by announcing a new policy for the much abused South Tyrol of 2 eyes for an eye and a whole set of teeth for a tooth. He threatened the sovereignty of Germany and Austria, which was safe, but was very cautious in attacking less defenseless nations. So enormous a commotion followed this speech that the fascists backed water, and the premier stated he had no intention of ever crossing the Brenner Pass, the boundary line between South and North Tyrol. He had, however, explicitly urged the reconciliation of the boundaries of Italy with those of ancient Rome, and his further activities followed his spectacular journey to Tripoli caused protests from both France and Turkey. Following the attempted assassination of Mussolini by a mad woman in April of 1926, the fascist army was called up and strict telegraph and telephone censorship were established. The immediate consequence was a pitched battle at Palermo, Sicily, with the regular troops aiding the fascisti. About the same time, fascist students at the University of Padua attacked and beat their fellow students from foreign countries and demanded their expulsion from Padua and from Italy. This also may be accounted a result of the attempted assassination, as the woman concerned was a British subject. The African trip, with its subsequent threats against the peace of the Mediterranean and a new, and this time laudable, offensive against the entrenched secret society of the Mafia, were interrupted by the most serious and threatening split in the fascist ranks. It may be that this is the entering wedge which will, in time, split fascism in pieces. Roberto Farinacci, with Mussolini and Federazione, one of the triumvirate, triumvirate, which ruled the inner circle of the fascist party, resigned on March 29th, his secretaryship general of the party. The resignation was understood to be asked for, and to forecast a more moderate policy. It is Mussolini's system to get out from under whenever necessary by sacrificing the agent of the methods he wishes to repudiate. Fascist reports stated that Farinacci would enter the cabinet. Instead, he is organizing an army and starting a movement originating in Venice, Udine, and Trieste against the powers that be. His successor, Augusto Turati, not to be confused with the socialist Filippo Turati, although in his first declaration he deplored violence, went on to say that fascism is always intransient, inasmuch as it cannot tolerate any compromise with the liberal or democratic minority. The liberal and democratic minority have been utterly crushed in Italy. This is a mere gesture. The new task of fascism, says Turati, is that of strengthening and popularizing the fascist point of view. The work of reorganization and coordination of the party for the purpose of making it even more homogeneous, united, and powerful. Turati's slavish devotion to fascism and to Mussolini is shown in his act, mentioned approvingly by the pro-fascist Italian Daily of San Francisco, of organizing at Brescia 10 days after the Matteotti business, while gloom dominated Fascismo, and even the Duke Mussolini himself, a Benito Mussolini club. What the first result of this serious break in the inner ranks of fascism may be, only the strength of Farinacci can determine, and only time will tell. Mussolini's own attitude is indicated by his recent speech to the Chamber of Deputies. No elections! This legislature must die a natural death. The probability is that Farinacci was dropped because his big job was the liquidation of the Matteotti incident. He himself acted as defense counsel for Amerigo Domini, foremost of the defendants. And once that was done, Mussolini dropped the onus of the Matteotti case with him. He has probably shrewdly estimated Farinacci's power of revenge and the many other crises from which fascism has escaped unscathed presage a like outcome for the Farinacci revolt. In the Forum for April of 1926, a printed debate was held between Shaw Desmond and William Y. Elliott on Is Democracy Doomed? Mr. Desmond, in his article, Fascism, the New World Issue, states the existing situation very clearly. The world, he says, will have to choose in the near future between fascism and communism. Already, if space permitted, I could fill many pages with accounts of fascist movements and organizations in countries outside Italy, in France, in Spain, in Germany, in Hungary, in England, where 800,000 avowed fascists are enrolled, in the United States. Here, I am referring not to the Italian Fascisti, but to the North American Fascist League, and in other countries. Thank God that didn't come true. Europe's governments, says Mr. Desmond, predicting a series of civil wars between communist Reds and the fascist Whites, or as he calls them, Blacks, nominally hold themselves apart from Fascismo, save in Italy. But when the Red and Black War comes, the officials will be found behind the new Fascismo, or, as one of them said recently to the writer in London, we shall take Fascismo over as a going concern, appointing our own men instead of those now in the head. In other words, the middle class, with its slogans of democracy and tolerance, seems to have run its race with the solidification of the Industrial Revolution which produced it. And the world faces a great new upheaval of society. Fascism, which was held by the capitalists of all countries as the savior of the middle class, has completely annihilated it. And that is the end of Little Blue Book number 1087, titled The Facts About Fascism, written by Miriam Allen DeFord. Thanks for listening, and join me in my next Little Blue Book.